Brother Elam, would you call us Sunday school offering, please? Well, good morning. What a wonderful day it is to be in the house of the Lord. Can anyone tell me what major topic we've been studying? Babylon, past, present, and future. And if you want to go ahead and turn to Daniel chapter, Daniel, we will be spending the day probably in the book of Daniel again. But when we look at Babylon leading up to it, we've seen that from the very beginning, the groundwork's been laid for what we know as for Babylon in the tribulation period. And it all began way back at Babel. The ruler was Nimrod, one kingdom, one main government, one ruler, one major ruler, and one language, which we don't know what that was. We continued on. We looked at Nimrod. Can anyone tell me what modern day religion, the religion that Semiramis, Nimrod's wife, set up resembles? Catholics. The worship of the mother and the son. Then we moved in quickly into not current, but Babylon as we know of it, and who made the Babylon that we know of Babylon, if that makes any sense. Nebuchadnezzar. As we said in the past, there were many kings before Nebuchadnezzar, but Nebuchadnezzar is the one that made Babylon great. He beautified the city, he made it ornate. When he took over an area, he didn't just take over it, but he reconstructed it. He, quote-unquote, modernized it for his time. He rebuilt the temples. He didn't view it as just taking over an area, but it was a way to further his kingdom, and he wanted it to be grand, luxurious, lavish. He went on to several major building site projects, if you want to put them that way. He enhanced the walls. He made that grand palace. And we even talked about how, a little bit in passing, how Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild the ancient city of Babylon. And that they say that the palace that Nebuchadnezzar built is shoddy work compared to the palace that Nebuchadnezzar built. He's known for the hanging gardens of Babylon. And what major river ran through the city of Babylon? The Euphrates River. And that played a role in the fall of Babylon. Do you remember what they did to the river? They blocked it off, and they entered the city through the riverbank. And it showed us it doesn't matter how high your walls are, how strong your defenses are, there's always a way. And we even talked about how that applies to our own lives, how the devil's not going to come in and knock down your wall with a battering ram or a catapult, but it's going to be in the little things. And then we started focusing on Nebuchadnezzar. And when he came in, we know he took Babylon. He came against it at least 3 or 4 times. And did he ever end up taking all the temple treasures, or only ever some of them? Do you remember the prophecy of Isaiah? What did he prophesy? Don't get me, I'm off guard, I don't remember which king. He said that all the temple treasures would be taken. So Nebuchadnezzar did not take all the treasures at once. When we read in Daniel where it says that he took some temple treasures. So every time he came against the city, it's almost as if he took a little bit, took a little bit, and took a little bit until there was nothing left. That's important because when we look at the time of Christ, we do not see the Ark of the Covenant residing in the Holy of Holies. The Ark of the Covenant, of course, being important, that is the throne of God on earth to the Jews. That was important because that's where the blood was supposed to be sprinkled for the covering of the sins of Israel. So whatever happened to the ark? That leaves a speculation. We do have a depiction of what appears to be the Babylonians carrying the ark off into captivity. You do have other men like Ron Wyatt, which I don't put a lot of stock into, but he claims that Jeremiah knew that Nebuchadnezzar was Jeremiah knew that Nebuchadnezzar was going to come against the city. That is not surprising because who was the one that was prophesying to Jehoiakim about the coming of Nebuchadnezzar? What prophet played a big role in that whole aspect of prophesying of Nebuchadnezzar? Starts with a J. Jeremiah. So Jeremiah played a great role in prophesying about the coming king of Babylon. Prophecy being either yield to him and you can stay in your homeland, but if you refuse, you're going to be taken away. Well, Ron Wyatt claims that Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant out of the temple before Nebuchadnezzar came, and he hid it in an area that the modern-day people called Jeremiah's Grotto. And he claimed that it got discovered, I don't know if it was the 90s, early 2000s. My guess would be 90s.
Well, I already know that somebody told me that it was in some kind of cave, and somebody had touched it, and they died. And then I think they said that the Lord, they could use the Lord to help that.
Okay. See, that's another instance for where people believe that the Ark of the Covenant is. They take that from Revelation, and off the top of my head, since I didn't look it up and study it in advance, it's in the book of Revelation. I can't remember, I would say within the first 4 chapters, first 5. Don't quote me, I don't remember. But it's probably referred to as the Ark of the Testimony. But regardless, some believe that it was taken up to heaven. There's others, Ron Wyatt claimed that he discovered it, that Israel currently has it. His big claim was that it was under, I can't think for anything this morning. Golgotha, and when Christ died, the earth cracked open, the blood of Christ dripped down, and boom, all sins were atoned for all of them. The problem with Ron Wyatt is, A, for me, that's a pretty big story, and B, if you know anything about Ron Wyatt, he made a lot of big biblical discoveries, and whenever you do that, I just begin to question. However, he did have Ken Hovind backing him up, if that means anything. But going on from a side note, last week we talked more about Nebuchadnezzar. We talked about how he besieged Jerusalem several times. He eventually ended up taking it, destroying the temple. He took Zedekiah into captivity. And then we started talking about famous biblical accounts. Last week we talked about the tree dream, if I remember correctly, where where Nebuchadnezzar was turned into a beast for 7 years. And we also talked about the image in the plain of Dora and the 3 Hebrew children. There's one other big account that we want to talk about, and it's key for our Bible study on Babylon. We talk about there being 2 important dates in the history of Israel that they hold to. Can anyone tell me those 2 important dates?
Mommy, be down, Skylar. Go down.
48.
48. Why 48, brother? after all those years, she finally came out from among the Gentiles and was granted land, a government, and she became a nation. What's the other day? I'll give you a hint. It's close to the number of the Antichrist. People hear this number and they tend to freak out.
Another 600 something.
It's 600 something. 606 BC to be exact. That's when Nebuchadnezzar took Babylon, took Jerusalem captive. And when we think about the time when Nebuchadnezzar first took Babylon, this is going to be one of those days, you ever listen to a preacher talking, you know he knows what he's talking about, but you know he said the wrong thing. This is going to be one of those mornings. So if you want to criticize, make notes. I already know in advance. So if I say that Christ is going to be defeated in the end times, that the Antichrist will prevail once and not all, yes, I have it backwards. But going at that, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem. In history, how did Christ refer to that? He referred to it as the times of what we are. What? Times of the future? No. If you're not a Jew, you're a Gentile. And he referred to it as time of the Gentiles. And while Israel became a nation in 1948, we are still living in that time of the Gentiles. If we look at chapter 2 of Daniel, what do we find in chapter 2 of Daniel? I mean, this is the key to all, if you want to say all the major kingdoms of the world. Not the golden image, but not the 3 Hebrew children. He saw a statue. In Daniel chapter 2, we have the dream of the statue. And in this dream, we have literally the timeline for the ages. It's every major kingdom that's about to come. And when we look at this image, what's the first thing we see? You're going to start at the head of the body, at the top of the body. You find exactly. You find the head of gold, which represents the Babylonian Empire. And in this dream, God reveals to Nebuchadnezzar the kingdoms to come, but he does it from man's perspective. Man views metals as precious, as valuable. And at the top of those, gold. And the head of gold, in his interpretation, Daniel reveals to Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, this is you. This is your kingdom. You are at the very, very, very top. You are the grandest kingdom that will ever be. You will be the most prosperous. You'll be the grandest. But the whole image is not of gold. So guess what? Your kingdom isn't going to be the only kingdom. There's going to come a day when your kingdom will be defeated. And it is going to, and we see it symbolized in Scripture as, what's the next kingdom? We go from the head of gold to the chest and arms of silver. So God informs Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to be taken over. And when we look at this time, the Assyrians were on the decline. He already defeated the Egyptians. But there is going to come a rising power under King Cyrus. And it's going to be a combination of two kingdoms. They're going to merge and unite. And we have two kingdoms. We have two arms. One represents the Medes. The other one represents the Persians. And it's a chest of silver. So we see we go from gold to silver. So the kingdom isn't going to be as grand and luxurious, but it's still going to be valuable. It's still going to be mighty. And then we move into what portion of the statue? So Babylon is going to be taken over by the Medes and the Persians. As we've already studied from the defeat of Babylon, that was taken care of under Darius, the Mede. He came against Babylon. But after that, we moved into the Grecian Empire, which is brass. And it's which portion of the body? The stomach and thighs are brass. So we see it declining, but yet as each empire takes over, the boundaries expand. They might not be as grand and luxurious as Babylon was, but we see that there's several different empires that's going to come on the rise. And then we come to what's next. Half of that, brother. One of those metals, not both.
Well, I thought Aaron and Clay were together.
They are, but that's the feet. We're not quite at the feet. We're at the iron, the legs of iron. How many legs are there? Two, because three would be funny looking, right?
Okay.
There's two legs. When we look at that empire is represented by, which is represented by iron, is which kingdom? The Roman Empire. So we have two legs, but one empire. How can that be? Well, the Roman Empire eventually had a split. You had the western side and the eastern side. The western side was the political side. The Eastern Empire was the religious side. It housed the papal authority. And then we get to the feet of iron and clay. So at the top we have Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. But at the bottom we have the feet of iron and clay, which represents future Babylon. So right here in this entire image, God lays out the entire timeline for the times of the Gentiles. And we will be looking at the feet of iron and clay after we finish up looking at Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar's Babylon. And how do we know that this is the exact timeline of the times of the Gentiles? Because then we go to prophecy. We know that the tribulation period is coming for one reason and one reason alone. Why is the tribulation period coming? Why did the Jews go into captivity under Nebuchadnezzar besides rebelling against the king? What was their crime? What was their sin? Idol worship. They've had one major sin throughout their existence. And it came into, we see it from the very start when Moses went on the top of Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments. They had a problem with idol worship. Idolatries would cause God to send Nebuchadnezzar as punishment upon them, and idolatries why the Jews will be why the tribulation period is coming. And it is for the Jew, it is not for the Gentile. But when will the times of the Gentiles be completed? We have that in this timeline as well. What comes after the feet of iron and clay? The stone, just any stone, cut out of a mountain, but without hands. So is a stone, is a supernatural boulder that is cut out of the mountain. what does this boulder represent? And in one day, all of Israel will be saved. And they shall look on him who they pierced, and they shall ask him, what are those scars in your hands? And he will say, those are the wounds I got in the house of my friends. And that begins this stone, which is
Right.
the millennial reign of Christ, the kingdom which Christ will come, will bring down, because he will put all enemies underfoot. And when we look at that stone cut out of the mountain, when it strikes the feet, all those kingdoms will be demolished. The entire statue was made and ground basically into dust, in chaff, and the wind blew it away. Christ's kingdom will be the last kingdom. And when we look there in Daniel chapter 2, that is the timeline for the times of the Gentile. You heard of people say, if anything, that is that, or this is the timeline. It is laid out in one chapter. God laid out the entire timeline for the times of the Gentiles. Now let's move on to the death of Nebuchadnezzar. Abadamus, who was a heathen writer who generally drew his inspiration from Berosus, he ascribes to Nebuchadnezzar making this speech just before his death. He claims that Nebuchadnezzar announced to the Babylonians the speedy coming of a Persian mule who with the aid of the Medes would enslave Babylon. We know that Nebuchadnezzar had an illness. We talked about that a little bit last week with his beast-like state, where it made his nails look. It made his nails grow like eagle's claws. His hair became like feathers. And he was out of his mind. He had no clue what was going on for 7 years. He ate the grass of the field like the beast. And we talked about how the Greeks actually ascribed a name to it called lycanthropy, which basically means wolf-like. But he recovered from this illness for some years before dying around 562 BC. He reigned over Babylon for either 83 or 84 years. No, I lied. He died at the age of 83 or 84 after reigning for about 43 years. And then he was succeeded by his son, Evil Merodach, who only had a reign of 2 years. But when we look back, history records that before Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar saw the demise of Babylon coming. He could see things building, and he knew that the Medes and the Persians were growing stronger, and that they would be the ones to overtake. So when we look at the life of Nebuchadnezzar, there are several things that we can learn. And I will just let you guys ponder it a little bit. What are some things that we can learn from the life of Nebuchadnezzar? Looking back and pondering, seeing his actions, seeing how he responded to things, how he lived. What are some things that we might draw and that we can apply to our lives and learn from?
Well, I like how parallels with Proverbs, where it says, right things before destruction upon the certain before fall.
Absolutely, brother. Does anybody else have anything else to add to that? If not, then if someone would go ahead and read Daniel chapter 4, verse 28 through 20. This has got to be a long morning. Daniel 4, 28, verse through 30. Daniel 4, 28 through 30.
All this
the end of 12 months he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, Is not this a great Babylon, and I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power, and for the honor of my majesty.
When we look at Nebuchadnezzar, he was a very prideful man. As Brother Human already read about the prideful spirit, we see here in Daniel, and even throughout our studies, we've mentioned it in the weeks past, how prideful, obviously, Nebuchadnezzar was. We see him repenting to God. I shouldn't even say repenting, acknowledging God as God Jehovah when he had to. But in the next breath, it's not that he's surrendering his heart, but rather he's adopting him as another God, as most heathen nations do. And they'll do that out of fear. When we look at Nebuchadnezzar and the passage that Mom just read, we hear his prideful spirit rising up once again. Is not this the great Babylon that I built? Isn't this what I created? Nebuchadnezzar was a very prideful man. And before he was even done talking in that passage, God passed judgment on him. And he went insane. Pride is the opposite of what God desires. When God chooses an individual, how many has he chosen on the basis of their pride? I would say none. But how many has he chosen on the basis of their humility? The man who can humble before God, the man that God can use, the man who is pliable, that is what God's looking for. And that is the reason God doesn't, I know I'm going to mess it up. He doesn't call the qualified, but he qualifies the chosen. I'm sure some of us have seen that phrase around. Probably because most of the time the qualified are too prideful. Oh, I can do that. I can do that, no problem. You know, God I'm already 3 steps ahead of you. I got it done. But God's looking for the individual who he can choose, who realizes that their dependency is not upon themselves or within themselves, but it's on God and God alone. When we look at that, there are men that God chooses because they humble themselves before him. Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 8, so we'll go ahead and read that. Isaiah 6:8.
Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Who shall I send? Who will go before us? Then I said, Here am I, send me.
It's interesting when we look at Isaiah the prophet, because for 6 chapters, he cries out one thing over and over and over. Woe unto Israel! Woe unto Israel! Woe unto Israel! He was a prophet. He was a man called of God. But if he would have been prideful, his pride would have made him rise above everything else. But all of a sudden, in Isaiah chapter 6, he gets an image. And it is that of Jesus Christ high and lifted up and on the throne. And what does he say farther in that chapter? Woe unto me, for I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of an unclean people. Now, if he would have been prideful, he would not have been able to humble himself before God. God did not choose Isaiah because Isaiah was prideful, but rather because Isaiah was humble. Because pride will never exalt you. It always, always brings you low. And someone, please read Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 23. Proverbs 29, 23. Proverbs 29:23. If someone else would find Psalm 10:2 and just 1.